So recently, I've been searching a lot about virtual reality, specifically regarding headsets. And a week ago, a news article from Bloomberg announced that Sony have paused production on the PSVR2 because they aren't selling enough units, which is very unfortunate to hear considering VR has been on a steady rise over the past couple of years, especially around the time the first PSVR released. So why has the PSVR2 failed? It was better, more powerful, and overall, more comfortable. It is warm. But there have been a few things holding it back. Firstly, the lack of new games has been a problem for all VR headsets at one point or another, but this new console generation has been especially dry, most likely because of the gaming industry still coming back from COVID almost 4 years ago, and the general lack of next-gen games have both played big roles in why there hasn't really been much of an incentive to buy a PSVR2. I mean, sure, there are games from the last gen that can be played on the PSVR2, and there are new games that you can play like Resident Evil 4 Remake and Resident Evil 8, but there simply isn't enough, especially when compared to PC VR or even standalone Quest headsets. Another big reason behind why the PSVR2 hasn't been doing so well is the price. We are at a worse off point economically, and that has been reflected in the poor sales numbers we see today. But the PSVR2 costing around £500 in the UK, that's just far too much money for people to be spending, especially considering the PS5 alone costs another £500. At that price, you can get a decent VR experience on PC using a Quest headset. And I mean, the first PSVR headset launched at £349, which was still expensive at the time. But this was at a point where VR was costing people thousands to build PC VR rigs that could run VR at a decent quality. But now with VR being more affordable than ever, the PSVR 2 just doesn't have that same incentive anymore. And the third factor as to why I think the PSVR 2 wasn't as successful is because the competition in the VR industry has become fierce. With the Quest 2 selling as many devices as it did, many people aren't seeing the PSVR 2 as a revolutionary milestone that it could well have possibly been. The Quest 3, for example, has an amazing, massive library of games, amazing performance, and doesn't require any wires to play. The PSVR 2 has a library of games, but not many that makes it stand out. The performance is great, but it also requires a wire to play. Considering the Quest 3 actually costs slightly less, makes it so much better in the eyes of the consumer. And it really is a shame that the PSVR 2 didn't reach the heights that people in the VR space expected it to, because it had some real promise like its predecessor. In all honesty, the PSVR 2 is probably the only headset I haven't really had hands-on experience with, mainly because of these reasons above, but also because I own a PC that can do everything that the PSVR 2 can do, but better. Those Resident Evil games can be played in VR through mods, and you can't get an emulator on the PS5, so the choice is easy for me. Another reason as to why the PSVR 2 doesn't have as many titles is that Sony claimed that the costs of creating AAA games in VR are significantly higher, which somewhat makes sense, but still doesn't really justify releasing the headset if there aren't going to be many blockbuster titles lined up for its release. But it is not all doom and gloom perhaps, as Sony are testing PC VR compatibility with the headset, which would honestly be an incredible move, as the headset boasts some serious specs as well as some cool features. For instance, the PSVR 2 has a display resolution nearly identical to the Quest 3, but also comes with eye tracking, which is always good to have. If the PSVR 2 was PC compatible, I could almost guarantee that it would fix the lackluster sales and then some. Have you played the PSVR 2? Why do you think it hasn't been as successful as it should potentially have been? I would love to hear your thoughts down below.